Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Kevin floated in the cold expanse of space, his heart pounding as he stared at the dark, infinite void through the small viewport of his escape pod. The stars, usually symbols of hope and endless possibilities, now felt like indifferent spectators to his plight. The hope had been a beacon for so many, a vessel carrying thousands of souls toward a new beginning on a distant planet. Now, it was nothing more than a memory, a ghost ship lost to the void, leaving Kevin as the lone survivor of a disaster that he couldn't fully comprehend. The days blurred together, each one a monotonous struggle for survival. Kevin's mind raced as he tried to come to terms with the magnitude of what had happened. The spacecraft systems were severely damaged, and the meager supplies in his pod were dwindling fast. Food, water, and oxygen, the very elements that sustained life, were running out. But Kevin was an engineer, a problem solver by nature. He refused to let despair take hold, at least not yet. He set to work, repairing what he could of the pod systems. The first priority was the oxygen supply, which was precariously low. Kevin scavenged parts from the wreckage of the Hope, which floated nearby, now just a twisted hulk of metal and shattered dreams. He worked with meticulous care, aware that one mistake could be his last. Each breath felt precious, each moment a gift he wasn't sure he deserved. The navigation system was next. Kevin knew that drifting aimlessly in space was a death sentence. He needed to find a way back to civilization, or at least steer toward a habitable planet. But space was vast and unforgiving, and the odds of finding a safe haven were slim. Still, Kevin pressed on, running calculations, analyzing nearby star systems, and plotting a course that might just lead him to salvation. But as the days turned into weeks, the loneliness began to take its toll. The isolation was absolute, the silence of space deafening. Kevin found himself talking to the pod's computer, even though it was no more responsive than the stars outside. He kept a log, recording his thoughts, his fears, and his growing sense of despair. It was a way to maintain his sanity, to keep himself tethered to reality, yet, reality itself began to warp in the endless void. Kevin's dreams became strange, vivid nightmares where the lines between past and present blurred. He saw his crewmates, their faces twisted in fear and agony, reaching out to him, accusing him of abandoning them. He woke up drenched in sweat, his heart racing, unsure of where the dream ended and reality began. The worst part was the growing sense of doubt. Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that his memories were unreliable. He started to question everything. Had there been a disaster, or was this all some twisted experiment? The thought gnawed at him, eroding his confidence and feeding his paranoia. One day, while scavenging through the wreckage, Kevin stumbled upon something that sent chills down his spine. Another escape pod, almost identical to his own, floated nearby. It was partially embedded in the debris, its surface scorched and battered. But what caught Kevin's attention was the fact that its hatch was sealed, the indicator light blinking weakly, a sign that it was still pressurized. With trembling hands, Kevin pried open the hatch. Inside, he found a body, a man in a flight suit, his face obscured by a cracked helmet visor. The sight was unsettling enough, but what truly terrified Kevin was the fact that the suit bore his own name, Kevin Andrews. For a long moment, Kevin stared at the body, his mind reeling. Was this some sick joke? Was he looking at a corpse, or was this some kind of twisted reflection of himself? The thoughts tumbled through his mind, each one more disturbing than the last. He backed away, his heart pounding, unable to process what he had just seen. Kevin returned to his pod, his thoughts racing. He tried to rationalize what he had discovered, but nothing made sense. Was he a clone, or was the body he found just another unfortunate victim who happened to share his name? But deep down, Kevin knew that the answer was more complex than that, more terrifying. He began to pore over his logs, trying to piece together the sequence of events that had led him here. But the more he reviewed, the more inconsistencies he found. Dates didn't line up, and details he thought he remembered clearly were absent from his records. It was as if his mind was playing tricks on him, rewriting history in real-time. As the days wore on, Kevin's grip on reality continued to slip. He became obsessed with the idea that he was not alone, that there was someone, or something, else out there in the void. The idea consumed him, haunting his every waking moment. He started hearing voices, faint whispers that seemed to echo through the pod. At first, he dismissed them as the product of his fraying mind, but they grew louder, more insistent. The voices spoke in riddles, taunting him, urging him to remember things he had forgotten. They spoke of the hope, of the people who had died, and of a truth buried deep within his subconscious. Kevin tried to shut them out, but they were relentless, invading his thoughts and his dreams. In a moment of desperation, Kevin turned to the pod's AI, hoping it could offer some clarity. He initiated a full diagnostic scan of the pod and its systems, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening. The AI responded slowly, its systems sluggish from damage, but eventually, it completed the scan. The results were chilling. The AI confirmed that Kevin was the sole survivor, but it also revealed something far more disturbing. The pod had been adrift for much longer than Kevin had thought, years, not weeks. The data showed that Kevin had undergone several periods of extended unconsciousness, during which the pod's life support systems had been put into a low-power state. It was as if someone, or something, had been preserving him, keeping him alive for reasons unknown. Kevin's mind raced as he tried to make sense of this revelation. Was the body he found a past version of himself, preserved in some twisted experiment? Or was he the experiment, a test subject in some unfathomable cosmic trial? The answers seemed just out of reach, taunting him from the shadows of his mind. As Kevin's physical and mental state deteriorated, he realized that he was running out of time. The pod's resources were nearly exhausted, and his body was weakening. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he still needed to do, some truth he had to uncover before the end. In a final, desperate act, Kevin initiated a full system reboot of the pod's AI, hoping it would restore some of the lost data or offer a clue to his true identity. The process took hours, during which Kevin drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind teetering on the edge of madness. When the AI finally came back online, it delivered a message that froze Kevin's blood. It wasn't just a system reboot, it was a complete memory wipe. The AI had reset itself, erasing all logs, all records, everything that had happened since the disaster. Kevin was now alone, truly alone, with no memory of who he was, where he came from, or what had happened. The void outside the pod seemed to close in around him, a silent, endless darkness that offered no answers, only oblivion. Kevin's mind was blank, a void as empty as the space around him. He was a man adrift, with no past and no future, only the present moment, which was rapidly slipping away. As the last of the pod systems began to shut down, Kevin made a choice. He could fight against the inevitable, clinging to the faint hope that someone might find him, or he could embrace the darkness, let it take him, and end the nightmare once and for all. With trembling hands, Kevin reached for the pod's emergency override switch, a device designed to put the occupant into a state of deep stasis, essentially suspending all biological functions indefinitely. It was a one-way trip, a final escape from the horror of his situation. Kevin hesitated, his mind a swirl of fear, confusion, and a strange sense of relief. The voices in his head were silent now, the doubts and fears that had plagued him quieted by the inevitability of what was to come. He knew that once he activated the stasis, there would be no waking up, no return. He would drift forever, a ghost in the void, lost to the universe. But as he hovered over the switch, a thought flashed through his mind, a faint glimmer of something he had almost forgotten: hope. It was fragile, barely more than a whisper, but it was enough to make him pause. Kevin closed his eyes and took a deep breath, the first truly calm breath he had taken in what felt like an eternity. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. A chance that someone, somewhere, might find him. A chance that he might survive, might live to see another sunrise, another world. It was a slim hope, but it was all he had left. With a sigh, Kevin withdrew his hand from the switch. He wasn't ready to give up, not yet. The void might be vast, the odds might be against him, but as long as there was breath in his body, he would keep fighting, keep searching for a way home. The pod drifted on, a tiny speck in the endless sea of stars, carrying with it a man who refused to surrender to the darkness. Kevin closed his eyes, letting the gentle hum of the pod's remaining systems lull him into a restless sleep. His dreams were no longer filled with fear, but with the faint, flickering light of hope, a light that might just guide him home. Kevin awoke to the faint hum of the pod's life support system, his thoughts sluggish as he tried to reorient himself. He had drifted into a fitful sleep, but the restless dreams had not been entirely unwelcome. Anything was better than the cold, empty void that surrounded him. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he lay still, staring at the ceiling of the cramped pod. The realization of where he was, of what had happened, hit him again, but this time it was less of a shock. It was becoming his reality, a nightmarish, but familiar, existence that he pushed himself up, groaning at the stiffness in his muscles. How long had it been since he had any real movement? Time had lost all meaning out here. His body ached with a dull pain that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. He knew he was deteriorating, that the prolonged isolation and limited resources were taking their toll, but Kevin was not ready to give in. The thought of that switch, the one that could end his suffering in a cold, clinical stasis, still lingered in the back of his mind, but he shoved it away. There had to be something more he could do. Something he hadn't tried yet. The pod's AI had been wiped clean, but it was still functional, and it responded when he activated the interface. Status report, he croaked, his voice raspy from disuse. Life support at 35% capacity. Oxygen levels stable. Nutrient supplies low. Estimated time remaining, 48 hours. Kevin frowned. 48 hours. That wasn't much time. The thought of his dwindling options gnawed at him, but he refused to let panic set in. He needed to focus. There had to be something in the wreckage, something he had missed that could extend his time, give him another chance. That he scanned the debris field outside, squinting at the jagged pieces of metal and fractured panels that floated silently past. His escape pod had drifted further from the Hope's main hull, and now it was surrounded by smaller fragments, bits of machinery, and scraps of what once were the comforts of a functioning starship. His gaze landed on a twisted section of the ship's outer hull, partially crumpled and scorched but still intact. He had noticed it before but had dismissed it as too far gone to be of any use. Now, with time running out, it seemed worth another look. Kevin maneuvered the pod's limited thrusters, edging closer to the wreckage. He held his breath as the pod jostled slightly, the motion sending a few loose items floating through the cabin. He ignored them, his focus entirely on the task at hand. If he could find something, anything, that might help him extend his resources, it would be worth the risk. That he donned his EVA suit, feeling the familiar weight of it as he secured the helmet. The suit was old, battered, and far from perfect, but it was still serviceable. He double-checked the seals and oxygen levels, knowing that one mistake out there could mean the end. With a deep breath, Kevin opened the airlock and carefully pushed himself out into the void. The silence was immediate and absolute, broken only by the sound of his own breathing echoing inside the helmet. He used the thrusters on his suit to guide himself toward the section of the hull, his movements precise and controlled. As he reached the wreckage, he saw that it was a large panel from one of the ship's cargo bays. The metal was warped and twisted, evidence of the catastrophic forces that had torn the ship apart. He scanned the surface, looking for anything that might be of use. A power source, an intact air filtration unit, anything that could buy him more time. His hands moved quickly, prying open a damaged access panel and peering inside. Most of the components were either destroyed or too badly damaged to be of any use. He sifted through the debris, pulling out fragments of circuitry and wiring, hoping to find something salvageable. Then, something caught his eye, a small, intact module, half buried under a tangle of wires. Kevin reached for it, carefully extricating it from the mess. It was a portable energy cell, still showing a faint charge. It wasn't much, but it was something. He secured it to his suit, then continued his search, determined to find more. Time seemed to stretch as he worked, his mind focused on the task. He found a few more small components, bits of wiring, and a damaged but possibly reparable oxygen regulator. It wasn't a treasure trove, but it was better than nothing. Satisfied that he had found all he could, Kevin slowly made his way back to the pod, his body protesting the effort. The airlock sealed behind him with a hiss, and he let out a sigh of relief as he removed his helmet. He laid out his findings on the floor of the pod, assessing their potential. The energy cell was the most promising. He connected it to the pod's power system, hoping to boost the dwindling reserves. The system hummed as the cell integrated with the